Okay, our final video is going to go over some of the common neurotransmitters, but we also want to talk about um, how neurotransmitters are removed. All right, we've talked about this a little bit in the context of acetylcholine. So this is a very simple drawing of a chemical synapse. So here's the presynaptic, here's the postsynaptic neuron, and this one releases the neurotransmitter. Well, the question is, how do we remove that? Because when it comes to neurotransmitters, there can be too much of a neurotransmitter or not enough of a neurotransmitter. So we need to understand, well, how are these neurotransmitters getting removed? Okay. And the reason that's so important is there's a number of medications that if we want to raise the level of a neurotransmitter, we can just block its removal. Okay. So we learned about one of those examples back when we talked about acetylcholine, the anticholinesterase agents. So how do we remove neurotransmitters? One way is enzymatic degradation. So that's where you have an enzyme in here that removes that neurotransmitter. We've learned one example, acetylcholinesterase, right? That breaks down acetylcholine, removes the acetylcholine. We also learned about a medication, neostigmine, that inhibits that enzyme in order to raise acetylcholine. All right. And these agents, this class of medications, these acetylcholinesterases, um, you can also use them to reverse general anesthesia. So remember, anesthesia are muscle relaxers. So when you have a neuromuscular blocking agent, right, where you're causing muscle relaxation during anesthesia, you can reverse that by raising the acetylcholine levels by inhibiting that enzyme. All right. There's another one called monoamine oxidase. So that's an enzyme that gets rid of norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. And we can use a MAOI, so an inhibitor of monoamine oxidase, as an antidepressant. So there's a number of antidepressants out there that increase norepinephrine and serotonin and dopamine levels by inhibiting that enzyme. We could also remove neurotransmitters using a transporter, so that's another mechanism. Instead of enzymatically getting rid of it, we can just kind of remove it from the synapse. All right, so the neurotransmitter will be sitting in here and we just bring it back into the presynaptic neuron. Serotonin gets removed that way. So there's a whole line of antidepressants that block the removal of serotonin. They're called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These you've probably heard of. Zoloft, Prozac, Lexapro, Celexa. What these do is they block this little reuptake transporter. So instead of reuptaking the serotonin, it gets left in the synapse. All right, and serotonin can improve mood if you can raise the levels of serotonin. And then some neurotransmitters kind of just diffuse away. So this slide talks about the three ways neurotransmitters basically get removed from the synapse. So let's talk about some of these other neurotransmitters. So we've learned about acetylcholine. We've learned about it in the context of somatic motor neurons, right? It's used at the neuromuscular junction, but that's not the only place. It's used in the CNS. It's used by the autonomic nervous system, which we're going to talk about later in the semester. So it can be used to control smooth muscle. It slows the heart rate. It can stimulate sweat glands. So acetylcholine is used quite a bit in many different contexts. Then we've got a class called the monoamines. All right, these are neurotransmitters that are synthesized from an amino acid. So certain amino acids, if you can change them a little bit, you can turn them into neurotransmitters. So an example is tyrosine. Tyrosine is used to form the catecholamines. The catecholamines include norepinephrine and epinephrine. I'm sure we've heard of epinephrine before. Another name for it is adrenaline. So adrenaline or noradrenaline. What these are used in a lot of different contexts, in the brain, in the spinal cord. They help with sleep and wakefulness regulation. They're utilized in what we call the fight or flight response. All right, so that's part of what is the sympathetic nervous system. So fight or flight is going to be increasing your energy, your blood pressure, your heart rate. It helps you get more oxygen into your lungs. So norepinephrine and epinephrine are used for that process. They're actually produced as hormones as well. So epinephrine and norepinephrine are neurotransmitters, but they also can go into your bloodstream and function as hormones. And that's the job of the adrenal medulla or adrenal glands. Dopamine, we've probably heard of dopamine before. It's also involved in a lot of different things. It helps regulate motor activity, pleasure, reward pathways, mood, sensory perception, attention. It's been found to be high in schizophrenia and low in Parkinson's. So there are medications that help to modulate the levels of dopamine. If they're too high, we might have what's called a dopamine antagonist. We can block some of that dopamine. If it's low, we can give a precursor of dopamine called levodopa, and that can be used to increase the amount of dopamine in Parkinson's disease. So a lot of medications out there are either lowering the effect of a neurotransmitter because maybe it's too high, or raising the neurotransmitter. Let's look at serotonin. That's a neurotransmitter that is synthesized from an amino acid called tryptophan. Intestinal effects, attention and cognitive functions, sleeping, eating, mood is a big one, and pain. Histamine is derived from histidine, which is an amino acid. Histamine is used to control certain smooth muscle, stomach acid production. It also is involved in inflammation. So we might take an antihistamine like Benadryl to reduce the inflammation. We might take a histamine blocker to reduce stomach acid production. Then we've got glutamate. Glutamate is a neurotransmitter in your CNS. It's used by a lot of interneurons in the CNS. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter. A lot of learning and memory requires glutamate as the neurotransmitter. GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So what it does is it causes chloride to enter neurons. And when chloride enter neurons, it inhibits the neurons. And the GABA is used to kind of prevent overexcitement of neurons. So it kind of keeps many of the neurons in check, if you will. What's interesting about GABA is there's a lot of medications that enhance GABA. So Valium and other benzodiazepines enhance GABA. So they're going to be nervous system inhibitors. Valium's often given for anxiety. It also helps you sleep by inhibiting the nervous system. There's also some other ones that are used, for example, with seizures or overexcited neurons. So Lyrica and Neurontin are also going to help to inhibit neurons. And then glycine, we're not going to talk too much about that. That's another amino acid that functions as a neurotransmitter. All right, the last kind of slide here, there are some neurotransmitters that are neuropeptides. So they're kind of smaller little proteins that neurons use. They're also often function as hormones as well. So they can function as a hormone or they can function as a neurotransmitter. Very interesting is substance P. It's one of these neurotransmitters that helps the transmission of pain signals to your CNS, so it kind of helps you perceive pain. Opioid neuropeptides are kind of the opposite. So they're suppressing pain. So these are opioid neuropeptides such as enkephalins and endorphins. So you've probably heard of endorphins before. They're kind of believed to give you that kind of feeling you get when you're running, that runner's high, almost that euphoric feeling that some people get. What they are is they reduce your pain perception. So they're part of what we call the endogenous analgesic pathway. Very fancy, but it's your own natural pain relief mechanism. If you've ever heard stories of people doing crazy stuff when they're in a lot of pain and they almost don't even perceive the pain, that's largely due to the production of these enkephalins and endorphins. So people have, escaped, crazy situations on broken legs, right? Even you might have experienced it playing a sport where maybe you turned your ankle in a game, but you kept playing. But then at the end of the game, all of a sudden the pain really started to be perceived. Well, that pain relief was due to your enkephalins and endorphins. They basically block the pain signal from coming up to your brain. Now, the downside, or maybe the good side, but has turned into a downside, is we've made derivatives of these natural neuropeptides and we've synthesized them. So examples are hydrocodone, so Vicodin, oxycodone or OxyContin, Percocet, morphine, fentanyl, and heroin are all opioids. All right, they're basically very, very strong derivatives of these natural pain relievers and highly addictive, right? Usually the individual might start on low doses of these for, maybe back pain. And then next thing you know, they need more and more, and then they start to resort to illegal sources of these things. Fentanyl is a crazy bad situation that we've probably all been hearing about. And obviously heroin's been around forever. But these were all designed for a good reason to treat severe pain. It's just they became highly, sought after and now manufactured not in a, appropriate facility and sold, illegally. But again, the interesting thing is they're all based on the fact that we have our own natural pain relief mechanism that suppresses pain in certain situations. So those were some of the most common and maybe clinically relevant neurotransmitters because they're either, deficient or overproduced in certain diseases or disorders, or we have medications that modulate them. And that kind of goes on and on. There's a lot of medications out there that either increase or decrease neurotransmitters.